Most women will never admit the truth. Not to their lovers, not to their therapists, and certainly not to themselves. But deep beneath the soft moans and the practiced flick of a tongue lies something far more ancient than desire. It is not about pleasure, not really. It is about power, about devotion, about surrender and dominance twisted together in a sacred, not so primal it predates language. And yet, in the dim shadows of intimacy, where flesh meets soul and breath becomes ritual, a woman kneels, not because she is weak, but because something inside her, archaic, ancestral, knows that this act is a mirror of the psyche. The body may move in rhythm, but the soul performs the ceremony. What would you think if I told you that within this act exists the entire architecture of the anima and animus? That what unfolds between parted lips and pulsing flesh is not mere sex, but a deep negotiation between the male unconscious and the female shadow? Jung taught us that we live through archetypes, primordial images etched into the fabric of our unconscious. The woman who offers herself in this way, who uses her body as a conduit for something wordless, walks with these archetypes at her side. She is not always aware of them, but they animate her nonetheless. There is the maiden, seeking approval, starved for affirmation. She lowers her gaze and hopes that he will love her more afterward, clinging to the false belief that if she gives enough, he will stay. Her hands tremble with a fear rooted in abandonment wounds, carried from childhood. Perhaps a father who never looked at her with pride. Perhaps a mother who taught her that being wanted was the same as being worthy. Then there is the temptress, Lilith reborn. She knows her power. Her gaze is locked, unflinching. She plays at submission, but she is the one who orchestrates the dance. She is not there to please him. She is there to dominate him from below, to make him unravel, to remind him that his release comes only at her mercy. She is shadow incarnate, erotic and dangerous, the part of the feminine psyche that refuses to be tamed. But even deeper than these lies the priestess. She does not perform. She initiates. For her, this act is spiritual, alchemical. She sees the man before her, not just as lover, but as archetype, warrior king, wounded child. She touches not just his body, but his unspoken pain. Her movements are intentional. She is not giving a part of herself away. She is transforming both of them through presence, vulnerability, and ancient knowing. Do you feel it now? That this is not about vulgarity or submission or even lust? This is about psyche meeting psyche under the guise of flesh. And yet, most women don't see it this way. They operate from the unconscious, driven by scripts inherited from mothers, media, and moments of trauma. They give because they think it will buy them love. They offer because they fear rejection. They perform, not inhabit. And this is where the fracture begins between the true self and the false self. They project. To know why a woman offers this kind of intimacy, one must ask not what she does, but who she believes she is in that moment. Is she the girl trying to be chosen? Is she the seductress trying to remain in control? Or is she the integrated woman, unshaken by judgment, unafraid of her own hunger? Because here lies the truth most never speak. This act is a portal, a way to collapse ego, to dissolve the illusion of separation. In its rawest form, it is neither degrading nor empowering. It simply is. But the meaning it carries, that is born from her own consciousness. You, listening now, have you ever asked yourself why you did it? Was it curiosity? Was it guilt? Was it the silent hope that he would see you, finally, as enough? Trace the origin, go back. Not just to the act itself, but to the moments before it. The breath you held, the script you were running. What did you think this would earn you? Too many women give without understanding what they're giving. And when they do, they bleed themselves dry. Because the unconscious woman believes her worth lies in her willingness to please. But the awakened woman knows, intimacy given without sovereignty is not love. It is sacrifice disguised as affection. Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." But a woman cannot be brave if she is unaware of her motivations. She cannot be free if she doesn't see the psychological cost of her silence, her smile, her eager tongue. Every act not rooted in self-awareness reinforces the chains she claims she wants to break. The truth is, Some women perform this act with the quiet desperation of the abandoned. Others do it with the cold precision of a strategist. And a rare few, those who have done their shadow work, who have walked into the flames of their own pain and emerged whole. They do it without attachment, not for power, not for love, but from wholeness. These are the women who no longer kneel. They descend. And so the descent continues, not into darkness, but into truth. The kind of truth that makes the bones tremble because it strips away every illusion a woman ever clung to for safety. The kind of truth that speaks not in words, but in blood memory, cellular remembrance, and psychic unraveling. She kneels, yes, but not in worship of him, not in surrender to male authority. She kneels as the high priestess knelt at the altar of transformation. In this moment, the ego dissolves, the false self shatters, and the mask she wears in the world begins to melt under the heat of desire, shame, and unspoken longing. Her mouth becomes the axis mundi, the center of the world, where flesh and spirit converge. But to understand this fully, one must look at the psychology of power. In Stoic philosophy, Epictetus taught that power lies not in what we do, but in how we interpret what we do. To the unconscious woman, this act may feel like submission, even degradation. If her sense of self is still built on external validation, her worth is then conditional. A man's pleasure becomes the yardstick by which she measures her own desirability. She exists in performance, not presence. Her pleasure is muted, delayed, or entirely erased. But the woman who has done the work, the long, brutal excavation of the self, understands something different. She sees clearly that giving does not diminish her, because she no longer gives from scarcity. She does not offer to be loved. She offers because she is love, a living embodiment of eros and logos, the erotic instinct fused with conscious awareness. This is the woman who has faced her shadow and refused to flinch. She knows the part of herself that once gave out of fear of abandonment, of loneliness, of being forgotten. She knows the girl within who thought, maybe if I do this, he won't leave me. She doesn't judge that part. She integrates her, and that integration is everything. Because until the shadow is made conscious, it rules the woman's life and she will call it fate. She will say, all men use me, without realizing she volunteered for the role. Every time she silenced her own needs to preserve his ego, she will say, I feel empty afterward, without tracing that emptiness to a self-betrayal so small and frequent, it became her identity. Now imagine her, the woman who has stepped beyond that pattern. She does not seek approval. She does not contort herself into the shape of a fantasy. She offers from presence, not pretense, from desire, not desperation. And her power in that moment? It is nuclear. Because she is no longer bound by the masculine gaze, she stands inside herself, fully sovereign, even on her knees. Most women never reach this point, because to get here requires fire. It demands the woman confront every belief she inherited about sex, shame, submission, and pleasure. It asks her to sit with the parts of herself that felt dirty, guilty, or objectified. It asks her to own the part of her that wanted to be worshipped for giving pleasure, and to also own the part that hated herself for it. This is the crucible of individuation. In Jungian terms, individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. And that wholeness includes the raw, erotic, primal feminine as much as the wise, nurturing mother. It includes the seductress and the sage. It includes the impulse to dominate and the desire to dissolve. A woman must learn to hold all these parts without shame. Only then can she choose, not react, from a place of inner authority. And you, who hear these words, do you see yourself in this? Have you mistaken surrender for sacrifice? Have you ever given your body in hopes that your soul would be seen? Has your silence ever screamed louder than your moans? Trace it back to the first time you felt your worth was dependent on a man's pleasure. Was it his words, his withdrawal? Or did you internalize the message long before you ever touched? A man that good girls give, that love is earned through performance, that the body is a currency and validation the prize? To rewrite this story, a woman must reclaim her agency in the most intimate moments. Not by withholding, not by posturing, but by becoming deeply, unapologetically aware of why she acts. Awareness transforms performance into presence. And presence is the foundation of all true intimacy. Carl Jung once said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." What are the thoughts that color your soul in these moments? Are they steeped in guilt, in longing, in quiet resentment? Or do they rise from grounded sovereignty, from a knowing that this act does not define you but reflects you? A woman who knows herself can give anything, her body, her love, her devotion, without losing herself, because she knows the giving is not what binds her. It is the motive beneath it. She is not afraid to taste the edge of her own hunger. She is not afraid to be seen in the full spectrum of her erotic power. She does not ask, "Will he love me more after this?" She knows, "I do not need to be loved more. I need only to remain whole." But what of the women who never felt whole to begin with? These are the women who learned early that their bodies were bartering tools. Perhaps not through violence, though for some, yes, but more often through subtle, invisible conditioning. A look, a comment, a cold silence when they said no, a sudden warmth when they said yes. And so, piece by piece, they began to understand, my safety comes through giving. My worth comes through compliance. They were not taught to love themselves. They were taught to be useful. And when that belief calcifies into the unconscious, the act of giving pleasure becomes a performance of self-erasure. The woman disappears behind the role. She becomes the pleaser, an archetype forged not from true femininity, but from trauma and patriarchal design. She gives, not from freedom but from compulsion. She smiles, even as she dies a little inside. She moans on cue, but her mind is 1,000 miles away, wondering if he'll text her tomorrow or forget her by morning. In this space, the woman is not empowered. She is exiled from herself. But psychology offers her a map back. The first step? Recognition. To see the gap between what she does and who she truly is. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow. The moment a woman admits that her motives are not as pure, not as conscious, not as liberated as she once believed. That her mouth may be moving with skill, but her soul is screaming beneath it. That she longs not just for his satisfaction, but for his validation, his approval, his gaze. That in truth, she fears she is invisible without it. It is a brutal awakening, but it is the beginning of everything. Because once she sees this truth, she can no longer pretend. She can no longer use sexuality as a mask for insecurity. She can no longer call sacrifice love. She begins to reclaim her desire, not as something to use for approval, but as something sacred, sovereign, untamed. You may know this woman. You may be her. You may have felt it. That deep ache, the emptiness that followed the giving. The way your body trembled afterward. Not from orgasm, but from regret. The way you told yourself, it's just sex, even though something in you felt hollowed out, emptied of something essential. This hollowness is not because of the act itself. It is because of the lie underneath it. The lie that your value comes from what you offer, not from who you are. That your worth depends on how wanted you are, not how whole you feel when no one is watching. A woman who lives by this lie will always overgive and underreceive. She will taste the momentary thrill of power, his gasp, his climax, his awe, but wake up in the morning with nothing but echoes inside her chest. And she will do it again, and again, until she breaks, or until she rises. Because somewhere within her is another woman. The one who remembers that sex is not transaction, but transformation. Who remembers that her mouth is not a tool for validation. It is an instrument of truth, of sacred intimacy, of choice. This woman does not kneel to be chosen. She kneels because she chooses. She gives not to be seen, but because she sees herself fully. She does not reach for a man's pleasure as a means to secure his love. She is love. She is fullness. She is enough. And when she acts from this place, oh, the difference is palpable. He feels it too, even if he cannot name it. He senses the shift, the depth, the power. He feels no manipulation in her touch, no desperation in her rhythm, only presence. Only a woman who knows who she is and who has nothing to prove. And for many men, this is terrifying, because they too carry their own shadows. The fear of vulnerability, of surrender, of being truly seen. They are used to the performance, to being worshipped by women who hope to be loved in return. But when a woman shows up in full presence, without neediness or pretense, the game changes. This is where true polarity begins. Not in role play or technique, but in soul presence. When the masculine meets the feminine, not the wounded feminine, not the performative feminine, but the integrated, embodied feminine, there is no longer a hierarchy, there is union. And this union, it is not about technique. It is not about performance. It is about essence. The body becomes the battleground for healing, for reclamation, for remembrance. And to the woman still trapped in the cycle of giving to be loved, hear this. You are not too much. You were simply taught to be small. Your mouth is not a tool of silence. It is the doorway to your voice. And your pleasure does not exist for anyone else's ego. It is your own holy revolution. The holy revolution begins the moment she stops apologizing for wanting more. Not just more pleasure, but more depth, more presence, more truth. Because the awakened woman no longer lies to herself. She does not pretend that his pleasure fulfills her if her soul is left untouched. She no longer swallows not just seed, but her own voice, her own needs, her own fire. She no longer trades her power for proximity to a man who cannot meet her. The woman in her fullness knows the difference between intimacy and access. She knows that her mouth is not a bribe, her hands not currency, her surrender not a tactic to be chosen. And in this knowing, she becomes untouchable. Not because she withdraws, but because she is no longer willing to betray herself in the name of connection. This is the alchemy of transformation, the movement from girl to woman, from pleaser to priestess, from shadow possessed to shadow integrated. Most men have never met a woman like this. They've encountered the anxious girl who gives head hoping he'll stay. They've met the wounded woman who fakes her way through pleasure, while praying he'll finally ask her how she feels. They've basked in the performance, mistaking devotion for need, mistaking silence for peace. But the woman who has walked through her fire and come out crowned in self-worth, she brings something else entirely. She brings confrontation. Because her presence becomes a mirror. And when a man stands before her, he is forced to see himself. Not just the parts he flaunts, but the ones he hides. His ego, his need for control, his own inner child begging for approval. She does not shrink to soothe him. She does not exaggerate her moans to protect his pride. She meets him honestly, with presence, with a gaze that does not beg but beholds. In that moment, everything changes. The energy shifts. The act, once automatic, performative, predictable, becomes sacred again. Because now it is not done out of lack. It is done out of choice. Choice is everything. To kneel because you want to, not because you fear losing him. To give pleasure because it rises from within, not because you were conditioned to please. To meet his desire with your own, not to manipulate, but to merge. And this choice, it is what turns the act from routine to ritual. Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But few women are granted this privilege without paying a price. The cost is their conditioning, their old identities, the masks, the patterns, the ache of abandonment they've dressed up in lace and lipstick. To become who she truly is, a woman must strip herself bare, not just of her clothes, but of her illusions. This act, once seen as simply physical, becomes a crucible for that shedding. The false self dissolves in the heat of consciousness. She becomes intimate, not just with his body, but with her own truth. And that truth is both brutal and liberating. It tells her, you were never meant to be chosen for what you give. You were meant to choose what you give from a place of power. And so she stops giving out of habit. She stops offering herself like a sacrament on altars that never deserved her. She no longer searches for herself in a man's eyes, no longer waits for her reflection in his approval. Instead, she begins to feel again, to want again, to let herself receive as much as she gives. She tunes into her own desire, not just sexual but spiritual, the desire to be met fully, the desire to be known, not consumed, the desire to be held in reverence, not reduction. From this place, she touches him differently. Her mouth is not a performance, it is presence. Her touch is not appeasement, it is invocation. Her gaze is not pleading, it is remembering. And for the man brave enough to meet her here, he too is transformed. He is no longer the conqueror. He becomes the witness. He becomes the devotee, not to her body, but to her truth. This kind of intimacy leaves no room for pretense. It requires everything: courage, awareness, vulnerability, and a willingness to burn down the old scripts in favor of something more sacred. You, who have listened this far, ask yourself, have you been living in your truth or your fear? Have you been giving from overflow or from emptiness? Have you tasted the power of your own presence? Or have you forgotten the sacredness of your own body? Because until you reclaim yourself in every moment, even the most intimate ones, you will remain a stranger in your own skin. But once you do, once you return to your own essence, everything changes. He will not touch you the same. You will not move the same. And what was once a way to earn love becomes a way to embody it. There is a moment in every woman's life, quiet, barely perceptible, when she realizes that the thing she kept offering was never meant to be currency. Not her touch, not her body, not her love, especially not her mouth. It is a moment that doesn't come with fireworks or applause. Often it comes in stillness, after the man has left, after the silence settles, after the ache of emptiness returns yet again like a familiar ghost. She sits in the aftermath and whispers to herself, I want more than this. I am more than this. And in that whisper, something begins to rupture. This rupture is not a breaking, it is a rebirth. Because beneath every unconscious act of giving lies a child still begging to be chosen. The child who thought, if I am good enough, he will stay. The girl who learned that pleasing is safer than speaking. That to withhold is selfish. That to be desirable is to be valuable. But she is no longer a girl. She is becoming woman. And womanhood demands she retrieve all the parts of herself she gave away in the name of love. This is not an easy return. To reclaim her voice, she must revisit the moments she silenced it. To reclaim her desire, she must face the shame that taught her to deny it. To reclaim her boundaries, she must stand in the fire of potential rejection. But on the other side of this fire lives a kind of freedom no man can give her. It is the freedom of detachment, not coldness, but clarity. Not withholding, but choosing. A woman who has done this work no longer views her body as a means to prove her worth. She no longer asks, will this make him love me? She asks, does this reflect my truth? And when she gives, it is not from emptiness. It is from integrity. Integrity in this context is not morality. It is alignment. When her actions match her essence. When her yes is sacred. When her lips meet skin not to be praised, but to be present. When her hands do not barter, they bless. This is why Jung said that individuation is not about becoming good. It is about becoming real. And the real woman is terrifying to those who have only known masks. She cannot be manipulated, because she is no longer trying to be needed. She cannot be possessed, because she is already whole. She cannot be impressed, because she has learned to impress herself. She is not anti-man. She is pro-truth. She is not a weapon, nor a reward. She is a force. And the men who meet her feel this immediately. The fragile ones retreat. The conscious ones rise. Because to be with a woman like this is to be summoned, not seduced. It is not her job to make him feel like a man. It is his job to become one. She does not coddle egos. She evokes kings. In her presence, the masculine awakens. Not because she bends to him, but because she refuses to. And what of the act itself? This intimate ritual. Once seen through lenses of power, games and unconscious need, it becomes something rare, something holy. Because in her hands, in her mouth, in her gaze, there is no manipulation, no game, no grasping. Only energy, intention, reverence. She does not diminish herself to lift him up. She brings him into his body, into presence, into surrender, not to her but to himself. She reminds him of what it feels like to be seen, to be touched without performance, to be held without agenda. And that is what changes everything. Because a man can receive pleasure from many, but it is rare for him to feel truly witnessed. And when she gives from that space, not to fill a void, not to secure love but from truth. He feels it, even if he cannot name it. He may say, "That felt different," or "You're unlike anyone I've known," but beneath those words is the deeper truth. "You reminded me of myself." That is her power, not in the act, but in the presence she brings to it. You, woman, who have forgotten your divinity in the act of devotion. Listen, your giving does not define you. Your surrender is not submission. Your silence is not required. You are not a tool of desire. You are desire incarnate. When you reclaim your truth, the entire energy of your presence shifts. You no longer beg. You no longer plead. You no longer hope to be picked. You pick. You choose what feels aligned. You choose who is worthy of your energy. You choose when and how you offer your sacred self. And when you choose from wholeness, not from wounds, your giving becomes gold. She no longer waits to be claimed, because now she claims herself. This is the arrival, the homecoming, the place where a woman stands rooted not in approval or reaction but in presence. The kind of presence that no longer fluctuates based on whether he calls, whether he stays, whether he says she's special. She knows she is special. She knows she is the fire in the forge, the spark and the silence, and she will never again reduce herself to a vessel for validation. The woman who once offered her body to be seen, now offers her truth to be felt. She has burned away the need to be nice, to be pleasing, to be picked. She has faced the fear that she is too much, too intense, too raw, and made peace with the fact that she is. She has stopped apologizing for it. There is no longer desperation in her touch, no calculation in her rhythm, no performance in her surrender. She gives only when she means it, and that difference, it is cosmic. The man who receives her now does not receive just her body. He receives her clarity, her command, her knowing, and it stuns him because it is rare, because she is not asking to be chosen. She is choosing. She is not trying to prove her worth through her skill. She is expressing her worth through her standards. This is where the entire dynamic shifts. The unconscious act, once tangled with fear and compulsion, has now become an expression of self-possession. She has nothing to prove, nothing to earn. She moves with the elegance of a woman who knows, my value was never up for negotiation. And in that knowing, the act becomes sacred again. Not because of how it looks, not because of the sounds she makes, but because of where it comes from. It comes from a heart no longer starving. It comes from a body no longer exploited. It comes from a mind no longer colonized by shame. She does not offer this as sacrifice. She offers it as art, as expression, as a fully chosen act of intimacy from a woman in full command of herself. No guilt, no obligation, no fear of being left. Only the fierce freedom of a woman who has remembered that her soul is the source, not the supplement. Jung once wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is what she has done. She has dragged the unconscious scripts into the light. The ones that told her she had to earn love. The ones that made her believe being wanted was the same as being respected. The ones that confused being used with being needed. She has dismantled all of it. And in its place, she has built something unshakable. Self-worth. Not the kind you shout from rooftops. The kind you carry in silence. In your gaze. In the calm way you say no. In the effortless way you walk away when something doesn't feel like truth. And now, the intimacy she offers is never transactional. It is transformational. Because she is transformed. There is no more guilt. No more guessing. No more pretending. And the ones who once feasted on her insecurities will find nothing to feed on now. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't over-explain. She doesn't chase. She doesn't perform for crumbs. She embodies the truth with such power, even silence becomes a sermon. She becomes the mirror, the reckoning, the invitation, the lesson. She no longer gives to feel chosen. She chooses to give because she is the chooser. This is what it means to reclaim your erotic power. Not to wield it as bait, but to own it as birthright. Not to seduce for security, but to express from alignment. The woman who lives in this knowing, who moves from this wholeness, no longer asks, "What does he think of me?" She asks, Does this honor me? And if it doesn't, she leaves. She walks away not because she's hard, but because she's whole. Not because she fears intimacy, but because she has redefined it. Not because she doesn't feel, but because she finally feels everything and refuses to betray herself ever again. This is the path of integration, of shadow met with light, of desire stripped of shame, of love stripped of need. And at the end of this path, she stands alone. Not lonely, but sovereign. Unapologetic, unshaken, unclaimed by anyone but herself. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. If this message stirred something deep within you, if you saw parts of yourself reflected in these words, it's time to stop hiding behind patterns that no longer serve your soul. Subscribe now and join a community of women breaking cycles, reclaiming power, and stepping into full emotional sovereignty. Like this video if you're done giving from emptiness. Comment below. What truth are you ready to own about your intimacy? Your story matters here. And share this with another woman who's ready to remember who she is. This isn't about judgment. It's about awakening. Your voice, your body, your power, reclaimed by you. Let the healing begin.